Hello, it's Leslie. Thank you so much for joining in for another message. This is the third message. I'm going through my book called Breaking Sex Ties and Surviving Dark Nights. You can find it on Amazon. Um, Here is the cover. You're wanting to see what it looks like. 10 years without sex, almost 11 now. So it's basically about my abstinence journey, the struggles, the successes, ultimate success because I'm still walking in abstinence, and excited to be able to encourage others who are going through the same journey. So as I said, this is the third message, and I'm going to be summarizing the book and kind of not reading verbatim. There are some sections where I'll read, but just kind of summarizing. Anyway, this section is going to be about a new start in Atlanta. Okay, so I was 26 years old when I came to Atlanta. I moved from Pennsylvania, went through a breakup in a long-term relationship. I was going through a breakup, and so everyone was moving down to Atlanta. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people were moving down here to because it was a kind of like how it is now. It was a moving and shaking, and there were lots of places to go. For people my age, the club scene was definitely hot. And since I had been with my ex for so many years, I really didn't have, besides my teenage years, I partied some. But basically when I got to Atlanta as a single woman, I partied. So I was also taking classes and going to school, finishing certifications, and that was it. So during my partying years, I was going to nice clubs, VIP clubs, meeting all type of celebrities, and just went on my first international trip in my 20s, and traveling, making good money. So I had great friends, and I'll say because of them, I was like in VIP a lot. I mean, I did okay, but they had me doing things. They were a few of my friends were a little bit older, and so they kind of gave me like access to things that I was not usually familiar with. So I had a great time. But in that, I got kind of caught up in a bit of a promiscuous lifestyle. I guess in these times you wouldn't call it promiscuous because you're just like dating and having sex. But I was basically doing what everyone else my age was doing, having fun, having sex, going out to the clubs like 3 times a week at times, just dancing, just having a good time. But in that, I got caught up in, like I said, sexual immorality, so to speak. But I didn't know any better because that's pretty much how I grew up seeing the women in my community and some of the women in my family behave. So it wasn't anything that I thought was a bad thing per se. But as I was partying, a couple of years had gone by, but I always had premonitions or inclinations from the Lord. I always had like a relationship with God that wasn't always religious, because like I wasn't even going to church as much, because I just went through a period where I'm like, God, show me who you are outside of religiousness or outside of the things that I already know. I wanted to unlearn the things that I learned and just let God through the Spirit teach me. But the thing is that whenever I'd get a prompting, like just say even in my party years, I'd want to go do something that was a little extra wild. The Lord, I would just feel something on my heart to say not to do it. And then sometimes I'd even have dreams of things, like premonitions of things that would come to pass later on. And so I'm like, no, I think I'm gonna pay attention to these warnings that later on I realized we all have, but we just don't all pay attention to it, or we all don't take it as seriously. Or a lot of times when you don't pay attention to the small promptings, you're not going to be privy or get the larger ones per se, because you're not in tune. So those small promptings kind of kept me from going overboard during my wild years. And when I say wild, I don't mean that just out there reckless, what most people would consider wild. It wasn't like reckless, but it was reckless in its own way. Like many of you know from reading the book, it's I was making men wear condoms. I was particular about the men that I slept with. But when you're sleeping with multiple men who aren't your husband, who you aren't trying to build a relationship, I went through periods where, I was kind of doing the most. Because of those promptings, premonitions, promptings, inclinations, um, the Lord dealing with me in my heart, you know, because of that, it kept me from getting out of control. In a particular situation, after partying in Atlanta for a few years, I had started walking in abstinence, and I was a couple of years in, so I was not dealing with the guys that I was dealing with. I was still going out a little bit, but not nearly as much, and just gradually getting away from the party scene, so to speak. So during that period where I was kind of like on the right path, I had run into my ex, or somehow we reconnected. And so we met up, and I'm going to read about that. That's in my book on page 7. So an ex-boyfriend whom I hadn't seen in many years reached out to try and reconnect with me. He and a group of friends and I met up at his hotel's presidential suite, and we partied. Then he pulled me to the side and explained that he was still in love with me and that he was ready for me to be his wife. He assured me that he had slowed down and was no longer the guy he used to be, and he was older and had put away his womanizing ways. My gut told me that he hadn't changed, but I ignored the feeling and agreed to meet up with him the next day to discuss the possibility of us getting back together. Later that night, he sent me a message. He sent me a text saying that he had gotten me a nice gift and was excited to see me the next day. When we had dated years before, he loved giving me lovely, expensive gifts, so I was excited to see what the surprise was the next day. However, that evening, something in my spirit, one of those premonition things that I was telling you about, showed me that he was no good for me. It was so loud that I couldn't pass it off as though I didn't hear it. I called him the next morning and told him I couldn't see him again. Later on, a mutual friend of ours, a couple of years later, said that this same guy was back to his womanizing ways and pretty much had gotten married to his quote-unquote long-term girlfriend. And I'm thinking, was he with her? Because when you say long-term, but anyway, I dodged a bullet because he ended up having the same ways. He was someone well-known. Like, I wouldn't say that he's a celebrity, but I would just say that if you Googled his name, you would know who he is, and he's a prominent person in the community. And so when I looked him up, based on what our mutual friend said, I had found that it was true that he had gotten married. He did the wife wrong. They didn't say specifically what he did, but we all assumed that he cheated, and then he had already had a baby with her. So there you have it. I dodged that. And a lot of times, I thank God that during that time when he and I reconnected, that I was strong enough. I was able to really see that he hadn't changed. It was the same spirit on him that was on him when I was with him many years before. So, but just say that I wasn't in tune to God. Just say that I was gonna, so as they say, spin the block, which, I could have ended up having a child, and God only knows what else. But I want to mention too that when God Later on, I realized it was God, the Lord, that was prompting me to stay away from him. Um, the prompting was so strong that it shook me. You know, the only thing I could think was it would have made me fall down very hard. It was just a bad feeling that I had about him. And it wasn't my own self, because I was just like gonna kind of go with the flow and kind of like train him, as we women try to do nowadays. Train him to be the right man. Train him to be right for me. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, teach him how to respect me, because he literally was like begging me to be back with him. And I'm like, based on that, in my natural sense, I was thinking, well, since he's begging so hard, he must be really trying to do the right thing. But anyway, it's great to listen to the promptings of the Lord so that you will know what to do and what not to do. So we're going to go to page 8 and get a little deeper here. It seemed that every time I was contemplating taking a deeper step into the fast life or wrong relationships, I'd get a warning, an inclination, or a sign of some sort. Early on, when those premonitions or warnings occurred, I didn't listen, and I paid a hefty price later. Eventually, I learned to heed the warnings, no matter how much they didn't make any sense in the beginning. The guidance and warnings were confirmation that God was really watching over me. At that time, I didn't exactly know God, or even if God had a name at all. In fact, the title of God was the least of my concerns, as I've never been big on titles. It was satisfying enough for me to know that I had God in my heart and was on a constant search for his truth. With each prompting I received and followed, God and I became more and more connected. Even though I didn't have all of the answers I needed to fully understand everything about him, I was growing more and more spiritually sound. Amen. You know, sometimes we'll get those promptings to show us what to do. And let me just say this. It doesn't take someone super spiritual to hear from God. It doesn't take someone who is reading their Bible every day, someone who goes to church every week. I mean, those things do help, but the real relationship starts within your heart. When you have a heart to seek God and you're seeking him with your whole heart, even if you don't even have all the answers, even if you don't know, like I was saying, I'm not going to give him a title. I'm just going to seek him sincerely. He will show up. He will give you the strength you need to overcome all temptation. It's in his word, and it's what he promised. A lot of times we, as people, some of the religious Christians, so to speak, they make it seem impossible to get in contact with God unless you're doing A, B, C, D through Z, unless you're right up under them following every command that they give. No, God is in our heart. He's there. He's present. It's just a matter of us. He's given each and every one of us the ability to reach him through direct contact. And all those other things and all those other people, all those other sources are definitely, great in its season. But it's no good if it's not within here. So I just wanted to remind people that you don't have to be some religious guru or some overly spiritual person in order to have a relationship with God, in order for him to help you through your abstinence walk. So I hope you get that. So now we're going to go to page 13, because I think the second message I skipped over the first few pages, the 6, 7, and 8, I think. So I did like 9 through 12. So now we're just going to jump to 13. I think 13. Yeah, 13. So 13, page 13 is chapter 2. And the title of it is No Strings Attached. Sex with No Strings Attached. I'm just going to summarize sex with no strings attached, that little section there. Basically, I was a woman, like I said earlier, out doing my thing, doing what I was comfortable with sexually. And what I didn't know was that I was hurting men in some ways. I thought that I was doing the right thing because I made men wear protection. I told men what it was in the beginning, like, hey, I was in a long-term relationship. I'm not trying to get tied up again. I'm just kicking it. But at the end of the day, you know, there's some sex ties, there's some soul ties, as they say. There's a connection being made, whether you want to admit it or not. I wasn't out to hurt men. I was able to have sex with no strings attached. I wasn't like most women where, you know, they would have sex with a man and then they're hounding the man and trying to get in a committed relationship with them. I was different than that. And I didn't understand why. In one way, it was like a superpower, because it's like, oh, I know not to get too attached to this person because I know what we're both here to do, and we're going to do just that, and then we're going to go along our way. Or, you know, there were some relationships where if I was single and they were single, we would just kind of kick it for a few months or so, in some cases a whole year, because we were both single. So then I was just with that person. But for me to be able to have sex with no strings attached, and then as I got older and I got a chance to see that this isn't right, and this behavior could potentially be toxic, not just for me, but for other people, for other men. So I had to kind of get to the root of that behavior, like why that was so comfortable for me. You know, one could say that, hey, you were in a long-term relationship from the time you were 19 all the way to your mid-20s. So, you know, and prior to that, I was a pretty good girl back in school. So, like, maybe I was just sowing my wild oats. I don't know. People can say anything, like, but the bottom line is that that is not normal behavior, and it's tied to some type of root. What is the root of it? And my root was based on my family, some of the women in my family and in my community. And even though that behavior wasn't demonstrated as a teenager or as, you know, a married woman, it was lying dormant. So eventually, that's how tricky the enemy is. He makes you feel like you're okay. He always plants seeds to make it seem like, you know, you're good. You know, just like when we're out there with that sexual behavior, we're building layers and layers to the point where we become like insensitive to things that are important. Nowadays, young women are way worse than me. They have unprotected sex. They go on first dates and expect it's a whole other program out here. It's a whole other story out here. But and it's not to judge, because I'm not quick to judge them, because I'm quite sure my parents, my grandmom, great grandmom, and then probably were thinking that we were out of control as well. So it's no judgment, but it's definitely not getting any better. It's definitely getting worse and more dangerous and more toxic. And that's why a lot of the young women, men too, but a lot of the young women, they're running around just real toxic and not dealing with and processing things, and using sex as a way or as a means to, you know, act out that unresolved pain that they're dealing with. So for everybody, there is a root behavior. Okay. And also within my family, I didn't see long-term relationships, a lot of them. I saw sprinkles of them, but I didn't see most of the women married. Most of them were single and strong women, and I didn't see them disrespect men though. Like a lot of women didn't talk crazy to men, and women who were in relationships, when they were in relationships, they served their men well. Whether they cooked food for them. So I didn't see all out let's dog men, but I did see, oh, if that one doesn't work out, go to the next and have a ball and brush it off and don't carry any emotion with it. We're going to go to page 15 where I talk about the dream that I had, the agent of change. So page 15, I had this dream, you guys, that it was one of the most scariest dreams I've ever had in my entire life. So, but even though it was scary, it was a comforting dream, because even though God was showing me some things in the dream, God was also giving me a sense of peace in the dream. So I wrote here that in the book on page 15, I said, in the dream, I literally felt how much the devil hated me and was trying to destroy my life through sex. If I collected all of the hate I'd ever felt people had towards me, the hate that he had for me in that dream was 100 times greater than all of theirs combined. Can you believe this? I had a dream where the Lord showed me, and it's really hard to articulate. Many years ago, I'd written it down, so it's somewhere in my archives, like written down. But basically in the dream, the Lord showed me how there was like a warring over me, like the devil was trying to destroy me. I literally saw this, and he was trying to destroy me through sex. And I don't know all the details, but I just know that it was the most evilest dream. And it took me like several days to gather myself after that dream. But at the same time, it was a peace afterward, where the Lord showed me the enemy cannot touch you. Walk according to my word, and you will be fine. Come up out of this right now. In this season, come up out of this lifestyle that you call healthy, that you call normal, that you say, hey, I'm not doing it as much as someone else is doing it, or I'm better than what I was last year, or even a few months before, because at that time I was just dealing with one person. And not that he was any good for me, but I had probably slowed down about a year or two. But the Lord didn't even want me dealing with him. You know what I'm saying? He was a wild guy, but he was familiar. And how many times do we stay in relationships because we're familiar with someone, because we're comfortable with them, because we got that soul tie? You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, I'm not going to have sex with anyone else except him because I feel like I'm familiar with him. Yeah, but he's having sex with everyone else, unprotected. Or he's got a wife, found out later that the same guy had a whole wife. And I was messing with him off and on for a couple of years. And I wasn't looking for the wife, but what happened was I stumbled upon her. It was many years ago. So I think she either called me or he accidentally had it on speaker. Something happened where I wasn't even searching because I didn't have a reason to think that he was married. When it came out, he couldn't even deny it, and he had this stupid look on his face. So later on, find out he wasn't necessarily good for me, even though later on he got a divorce. But by then I didn't trust him because I'm like, how could you play me like that? We weren't in an exclusive relationship, I will say that. We were just kind of kicking it. Like during the times that I was single, I would see him exclusively. Not that it was a commitment, but I trusted what we had. And so I was like, oh, since I'm not seeing anyone, I'm just going to kick it with Donovan. And then if I started seeing someone, I just totally let him go because I did know how to be loyal to one person. Excuse me, guys, my light went out. Yeah, I did know how to be loyal to one person. So anyway, that dream shook me. And Like I said earlier, in my mind, I didn't see anything wrong. I had a normal sexual lifestyle for a woman who was my age. I could probably think of a million reasons why the Lord called me out of my sexual ways. But one of the things was what was going on in Atlanta at the time. Atlanta was becoming very, very just wild. Like anything started to go where sex was concerned. It's like people were having like menage a trois. Not saying that these things didn't happen before, but they were just happening more heavily. Like it was wild. It was becoming wild. So page 16 in the book, I'm going to read here. It says, Atlanta was becoming increasingly wild in the partying and dating scene. Couples were beginning to have open relationships and threesomes, and women were becoming just as promiscuous as the men. It was also starting to become more common for people to participate in sex parties and swingers clubs. The rate of sexually transmitted diseases was rising rapidly in Atlanta. Although I never participated in wild sexual behavior, I was certainly open to it and with the right person. See, even though I didn't go there, God knew that if I would have continued on in my way, whether I was with just one person or my mind was open to all of that stuff. My mind was open to it. And of course, I was thinking I was doing the right thing because I was like, well, if I do that particular thing, then it would just be with this, that, and the. But how many people have been in these wild sexual relationships, even in exclusive relationships, so-called exclusive, and it just caused damage in the relationship? And let me just say this, it opens up portals. And a portal is a doorway, a gate, an entrance for the enemy to get in. You know, some spirits are harder than others to loosen. Some things are just spirits that attach themselves, that make it hard for you to kind of let go of something. But some spiritual wickedness that you participate in, remember, you open the gate. Nothing can enter inside of you, sexually, relationally, until you open the gate and you receive it and you accept it. But when you open those gates, it's not always easy to shut them. And the deeper you dive into sexual immorality, the harder it is to come up out of that. Have you ever seen some guy, on women too, because I see a lot on women as well, where you're just like, yo, he's a good looking fella, but he has like sexual spirits attached to him, like stronghold. Like he wouldn't be able to be faithful if he tried to. Like it's gonna take the work of God to deliver him from whatever spiritual, you know. And I've even, in hindsight, I've even had that in relationships where, a couple of relationships where I'm, you know, when I was younger, I was like,